Can't decide and torn between a romantic, comedy, action, or an indie film to watch for the weekend? Well. Golden State Media Concepts Movie Podcast is your ultimate guide to the latest movies. Join us as we dissect the latest on the blockbusters. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Movie Podcast.
Welcome to the GSMC Movie Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your co-host, Keith, and this is my other co-host, Cynthia.
Hello.
So, Cynthia, how's your week been?
It's been great. You know, I've been doing a lot of exercise, some meditation in the morning, all that good stuff to just kind of unwind. So,
Watching a lot of movies?
Movies, yes. It was Veterans Day that just passed, so I'm pretty sure nobody worked on Monday that passed, so it's a great day.
I actually did work on Monday.
That's terrible. I did not work, so it was great. Let's see. Did I watch a movie on Veterans Day? You know what? I can't even think that far back. I'm like, what's today? Wednesday? I don't know my days, but no, I can't remember what. I know I watched something on my day off, but I can't quite remember at the moment. What about you?
That's okay. Speaking of Veterans Day, there was a pretty big blockbuster movie that came out over the weekend that focused around a historic battle in World War II called Midway. It's an action-adventure film, as we would expect from any movie that's based off of something from World War II. It's based on the true historical events that occurred after the devastating Pearl Harbor attack. It centers on the Battle of Midway, hence the movie title, a clash between the American fleet and the Imperial Japanese Navy, which marked a pretty pivotal turning point in the Pacific theater during World War II.
Yes, I think it's a perfect time actually to release that movie, Midway, during Veterans Day. I mean, what better timing, right? Everybody has a 3-day weekend. Why not hit the movies? And to be honest, my first initial thought, just by looking at like the title and the trailer, I wasn't that intrigued until I saw Nick Jonas. No, I'm kidding.
No, I mean, hey, being honest, I have a little bit of a guy crush on Nick Jonas. I think he's pretty great.
There's a lot of familiar faces, a lot of familiar actors in the movie, so I was intrigued, and I did see a large snippet of the movie. Mm-hmm. But yeah, no, it was pretty interesting, I will say that. Yeah,
Dennis Quaid of, I believe, Progressive Insurance fame, He was just recently made into the spokesperson of an insurance company, and he has some pretty funny commercials. He's in this movie as well. He actually, in an interview, specifically mentioned how much of an honor it was to portray people who had, given as much as they did for their country during that time. Mm-hmm. The films was selected as, I believe it was Time Magazine's kind of surprise box office winner over the weekend, because it did pretty well. But overall, it seems like the critics aren't really happy with the movie. They think of it kind of as just like a Michael Bay World War II movie. It's not directed by Michael Bay. It was like a passion project, and technically it's an indie film, which I thought was really interesting. Mm-hmm. But it seems like most of the audiences that have gone to see the film really enjoyed it, which I think kind of speaks to what people are looking for when they go to movie theaters.
Right, yeah. According to Rotten Tomatoes, there were around 5,000 verified critic reviews, and the ratings showed that Midway is 92% approved by the audience. So, yeah, I was pretty surprised by that high number, especially for Rotten Tomatoes. I feel like there are some hard critics on that site. So to see that Midway was 92% approved by audience members, that's an astounding number right there. But yeah, I did like how the film, as we previously mentioned, it is based on real life events, and it tells a story of the leaders and soldiers who used their instincts and bravery to overcome the odds. And again, that is why Dennis Quaid and his co-stars said that it was such an honor to portray, the lives of those who fought for our country. So like I said, overall, I think it was a great movie. What about you? What were your thoughts, Keith?
Well, if I'm being super honest, I haven't seen it yet. I just kind of read the synopsis online. From reading the synopsis, the plot kind of sounds like it gets bogged down in the beginning of the film by a lot of the technicalities in legislature at the time. There was a bit of an argument between the military and Congress about whether or not Japan was actually going to attack Pearl Harbor, because there were telegrams that were intercepted by the U.S. military prior to the Pearl Harbor attacks. So part of the first portion of the movie is discussing that the military did try to warn Congress that there is an imminent threat from Japan on Pearl Harbor, and we need to do something about it. So I think the first portion of the movie is really more about kind of what it took to get Congress behind a war effort in the first place, rather than it kind of focusing on just the action. And it seems like, in reading the synopsis, some of the tactics and the way that the movie goes about handling those get a little bit bogged down in the chaos of battle. And it's only, from what critics were saying, that's only punctuated well by the excellent special effects and the action scenes. So I'd be interested to see it. It definitely looks like a film that is going to be a good, like, family film. If you've got older kids, I think it'd be a great candidate for your $5. Do they still do $5 movie Tuesdays?
That's pretty unheard of. I think so, but I'm not sure.
It's probably like $7
Let us know in the
now.
comments where we can go see this movie for $5, because that is cheap. Okay?
That is not Sunrise off of Greenback. I don't know if you all are in California, but if you're listening to this in Northern California, Sunrise off Greenback, you know what I'm talking about.
Well, thank you for that history lesson there, Keith. But yeah, if you guys want to learn more about Pearl Harbor, you can just pop this movie in instead of reading a book. But speaking of,
I don't know if I would advise that.
I'm definitely more of a visual learner. So
the History Channel is probably a better source of information than a blockbuster movie.
But Nick Jonas and Dennis Quaid are in this movie. You got to see it.
I guess if I could take my history lessons from Nick Jonas and Dennis Quaid, then that would be pretty interesting. Like, if you could pick any movie star to give you a history lesson, who would it be?
Oh, that's a good one. I need to think about one. Let me see. So a movie star that would give me a history lesson, I would probably say, man, you caught me off guard here. You caught me off guard here. I can't think. I feel like there's like so many people I want to give me a history lesson. Can I say Oprah?
Oprah?
Even though she's not a movie star, but I would definitely want to hear a lot of, good tips and just anything from Oprah.
I'd pick David Attenborough. He's the British guy that does all of the nature documentaries.
Oh,
He's got like a really nice, just beautiful voice, and I can just imagine him telling me about like everything that Winston Churchill did in the 1930s and 40s.
Interesting. I like history. I like learning about it, but I can't like just pop open a book and like start reading about history. Like I said, if it's visual and there's special effects, then I'm so for it. And then speaking about special effects, I'm going to dive into who produced and who directed the movie Midway, which was Ronald Emmerich. Ronald Emmerich produced this movie, and he's widely known for his disaster films and visuals, as Keith stated. Other films that Ronald Emmerich directed and produced include the 1996 movie Independence Day, 2012, and the 1998 movie Godzilla.
With Matthew Broderick. Do you know who that is?
I don't. Tell me.
So Matthew Broderick is the guy who was in Ferris Bueller's Day Off. So the 1998 Godzilla movie is widely considered as like one of the worst movies to be made in the 90s. And like, I was 8 years old when that came out.
Says who?
Says most people. If you there's a whole genre of film called trash film, and it's basically movies that are great because they're so bad. Movies like The Room or Birdemic fall into this. They're directed by individuals.
I need to see this genre. Where can I find this genre? I'm intrigued.
You probably have to buy the DVD or maybe rent the movie off of Amazon. I know that Amazon has or at least I think Amazon has the Disaster Artist on their movies like options for play. So The Disaster Artist is a documentary style film, kind of, because it's based off of a book that was written by one of the guys who was on the set for this movie called The Room, which is widely considered like the forefather, if you will, of the trash film genre, because it's this movie that was directed by I can't remember his name right now, but he's a very interesting and eccentric guy. But he directed this movie and he was very passionate about it, very heavily influenced by like Rebel Without a Cause and James Dean and all the classic movie actors and like the Hollywood scene. And he spent just a ton of money and did a ton of ridiculous things during the production and the filming of the movie. And it's just, the whole thing is just a cringe fest. And it's so cringy that it's hilarious.
I feel it.
There's like this whole culture of going to the movie and playing catch outside before the movie shows and bringing spoons into it's pretty funny. It's a very interesting like subculture that you should definitely check out. And
I think I want to be a part of this cringe fest. I need to experience it one time for the one time.
Yeah, put in the comments below if you think Cynthia should watch The Room, because personally, I think that's an obvious yes, but it's pretty hilarious.
That's hilarious. Well, we're going to take our first break right now. We are ending on trash genres and
Midway. That's what we were talking about
Midway.
in the first place.
Yeah, Midway and trash genres. We'll be right back.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome back to the GSMC Movie Podcast. I'm your host, Cynthia. And right before we went on break, we were discussing about the new movie that just came out during Veterans Day weekend, Midway, and trash genres, introduced to us by Keith. So moving on, we're going to be discussing about a new action comedy film that will be releasing this Friday, November 15th.
If I had to guess, it's mostly comedy.
Charlie's Angels, which you guys may have heard of it in the past. This is the third remake of the movie. And I really want to hear Keith's thoughts about this
First
movie.
off, it's not technically a remake. Elizabeth Banks has confirmed that it is the third installment in the current franchise. So it's not a remake.
We're going to call it installment then. Installment. But to me, you see, I grew up watching the first Charlie's Angels.
Wait,
release.
You watched the first Charlie's
When
Angels?
I was, it was back in the year 2000. I was 5 years old, but when I
mean, Tom Hanks is classic in that movie, but he's about the highlight of it, in my opinion.
Oh, my goodness.
Halle Berry of Catwoman fame is one of the stars of that film, right?
No, Halle Berry not in Charlie's Angels.
Are you sure?
Yeah, in the year,
she was in that one.
The first one was released in 2000, the year 2000, and then they did a second Charlie's Angels, which is called Charlie's Angels Full Throttle, and that movie was released in 2003. Now they have a third installment, as Elizabeth Banks and Keith said. Third installment releasing this Friday, November 15th. To be honest, I'm not too sure how I feel about that. I am not too sure.
What were your thoughts when you first saw the trailer? Because I'm going to be honest, when you sent me this and like the show notes that we were going to talk about this, I had to Google it because I just didn't believe that they were actually going to try to resurrect this thing. I feel like it's like a dead horse that's been beat so many times that you just can't bring it back.
No, honestly, I don't disagree with you. I don't disagree with you.
Good.
That's why I wanted to bring it up in the show today, because I want to know, tell us in the comments how you feel. If you grew up watching the older Charlie's Angels, what are your thoughts on the new one that's releasing this Friday? Because exactly as you said, Keith, they're trying to resurrect. You said resurrect a dead horse. And I'm just used to the original cast members of the movie. So the original cast includes Cameron Diaz, Drew Barrymore, and Lucy Liu. And the new cast now involves Kristen Stewart, which she played in Twilight, her role in Twilight, which that's a whole nother discussion.
Yeah, can we talk about that? Robert Pattinson we're having a Robert Pattinson-assance. I'm trying to combine Renaissance with Robert Pattinson's last name.
I was like, what are you trying to do right now?
Yeah, because he just came back in the movie The Lighthouse, which has been receiving rave reviews from the critics, and supposedly he's amazing in it. I haven't seen that movie yet. And now we have a new film by Kristen Stewart. She was the star in Twilight, I think, right?
They were star lovers in Twilight.
Star-crossed lovers, right? And she turns into a vampire at the end. Sorry, spoilers. We'll make sure to write down spoilers.
Right.
If you're reading Twilight, I'm sorry if I ruined the book for you. I apologize. But
I don't think anyone's reading that those books were like so mid-2000s. I'm kidding. But yes, so we want to know who had the better comeback, right? We were trying to decipher that. Kristen Stewart or Robert Pattinson. Personally, I'm going to go with Robert Pattinson.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to have to go with Robert Pattinson as well.
Okay, we
Plus,
agree.
he's just so handsome. And that hair. Have you seen his hair?
Yeah, it
It's
looks
amazing.
soft.
I know. Yeah, it's great. Anyway, I want to know who does his hair and what product he uses, because I'm going for that Pattinson look.
And as we were saying, so the new cast involves Kristen Stewart, Elizabeth Banks, Naomi Scott, and Ella Balinska.
And Elizabeth Banks actually also wrote and produced and directed a lot of the film as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so she's hands-on to the new Charlie's Angels. And you know what's so funny? This is kind of going off topic, but I don't know if you saw the interview, Keith, with Naomi Scott, Kristen Stewart, and Ella Balinska. They did an interview with Fandango. And it's always so funny to me when actors on screen have, like, I'm going to say normal or American accent, and then when they're off the screen, they're like British or Australian. Like Ella Balinska and Naomi Scott, I was again shook, baffled to hear they're British. And
really?
On screen,
you can't tell.
You cannot tell. So I'm like, that
okay.
is a skill right there to completely just change the way you speak.
Yeah, I wonder how it sounds to them. I wonder how we speak sounds to them.
Right.
Because I'm terrible at imitating like a British accent. So I just wonder what they do in order to imitate an American accent.
Well, that's what I'm
funny.
saying. I'm like, that's a skill set. 'Cause I feel like there's a lot of entertainers who are able to do that. Isn't Robert Pattinson also? Or am I mistaken?
I have no idea. I don't follow a lot of these movie stars.
But yeah, so that is something that I did find interesting with these stars is that the way they speak on screen, they're like a total 360 off screen. So just something I wanted to throw that in. And this film, as Keith said, a third installment of the already established franchise. The very first Charlie's Angels movie grossed $125.3 million in North America and $148.8 million in other territories. So for a worldwide gross of $264.1 million.
I am flabbergasted that this is ranked in the top 20 highest grossing films of the 2000s.
Oh yeah, this film was marked the 12th highest grossing film of 2000.
Well, the 2000s decade, correct?
Correct.
Yeah, because it came out in 2003.
Mm-hmm. So it's not, just like you, I was actually pretty surprised too because, I mean, I love the movie, but I wouldn't say it's like you have to go see it. I'd say the majority of the audience of Charlie's Angels is directed more towards women. I feel like women would enjoy the movie more than men. Mm-hmm. Unless you want to see, I mean, they are pretty sexual on
which is part of the reason why I was surprised that they're resurrecting this franchise in the first place, because if any time is a bad time for them to put out a movie with a bunch of hypersexualized women doing
fighting crime.
Yeah, fighting crime. I feel like now would be the wrong time to do that. It's just, I don't think it's going to be received well by a lot of audiences. So I'm really interested to see how they kind of like tread that line of what Charlie's Angels was originally. It's like the three most attractive, in quotes, women in Hollywood playing these no-nonsense private detectives who work with this one hapless older gentleman who's like, whoop-de-doop-de-doo, can you go do this thing for me?
Go
really
save
funny.
this person. This person was kidnapped. You must go.
Yeah, exactly. And then, and they always seem like woefully ignorant of the fact that the women that they're working with are considered to be like the most attractive women in the world, and they have this weird naivete to them. So I just think it's really interesting to see that they're doing this franchise, and I'm really interested to see how they execute it and try to target a younger generation with it, because it definitely is not. It's not made for my age group. I would argue that's probably not even made for your age group either.
No, absolutely not. I'm in my mid-20s, and yeah, to be honest, I don't even know if I'm going to go watch this film. But if you do watch this film, let us know in the comments if you liked it or not. What were your thoughts? But so far, according to Rotten Tomatoes, the tomato meter, which is how they, I guess, rate the movie.
They should call
Rotten
it the
Tomatoes.
ketchup meter, in my opinion.
Yeah,
because it's like you smash all of the opinions together, and when you smash tomatoes together, you get ketchup.
Well, on the website, it's a splat. It's a green. If you've gone to Rotten Tomatoes, it's a green like splat mark, and that means it's rotten.
What? No, an unripe tomato is green. It can't be rotten if it's unripe.
I didn't make the rules, Keith. I'm just going based off the website.
Okay, fine.
But according to the tomato meter, indicates that the upcoming movie, Charlie's Angels, releasing this Friday, is at 63% approval rate so far. 63%.
I mean, I don't trust Rotten Tomatoes for hardly anything, especially knowing that the green is supposed to portray a rotten tomato and unripe tomatoes are green, so Rotten Tomatoes can't possibly be green because they'd have to be overly ripe to have been rotten. But I'm hopeful for most movies. It's never a good thing when a bad movie comes out unless it is absolutely horrible, in which case we can laugh about it.
Right.
So anything that's kind of in that middle ground, it's just ultimately not really. It's not really accessible, and I'd rather see an accessible and enjoyable movie come out. So I'm really hopeful that this film does great and that it is super entertaining.
I think it will for sure be entertaining. It will for sure be entertaining.
Elizabeth Banks is great. I loved the work that she did in 30 Rock, and she was also in Scrubs.
Yeah.
And she was easily hateable in Scrubs, but only because of the character that she played. So.
Exactly. No, I honestly love Elizabeth Banks too. So I am pretty intrigued on, especially she did write, produce, and was very hands-on in the movie. I am kind of intrigued to see how it did all come out. And on that note, we're going to take another quick break. We're ending on Rotten Tomatoes, Charlie's Angels, and when we come back, we're going to talk about the Netflix flick of the week. We'll be right back.
Watching TV has changed over time. Streaming has become the new norm. That's why Golden State Media Concepts television podcast dives headfirst to the world of cord cutting. Want to be on the loop of what's hot in Netflix? Or if it's not a preference, what about original shows in Hulu? We've got you covered. Join us as we fill in the blank and talk about movies to stream and what show you should be binging. This is the Golden State Media Concepts television podcast.
Welcome back to the GSMC movie podcast. I am your co-host Keith. This is my co-host Cynthia. Just
Hello.
Reintroducing us at the end of the show for no reason.
You know who we are.
Yes, this is definitely not our first episode together on this podcast. So we are going to go over our Netflix flick of the week. Cue cool music.
Woohoo.
Yeah, cool. All right. Maybe we'll add it in post.
Right.
There's no post. Okay. So our flick of the week this week is The End of the Tour, which is a film that chronicles the journey of journalist David Lipsky and the mysterious author David Foster Wallace, played by Jesse Eisenberg and Jason Segel, respectively.
Why is he mysterious?
So David Foster Wallace is the author of I guess I'll call it a tome of a novel because it's like thousands and thousands of pages long, called Infinite Jest. He pretty much like spawned an entire movement of a literary style, and he came from complete and total obscurity and had this meteoric rise in like fame according to like English writers and English critics circles. And then he suffered from a lot of mental illness, and so he actually took his own life. Wow. I don't remember what year it was in. It's pretty heavy stuff. He was taking some antidepressants, and then he went off of them unexpectedly and didn't tell anybody, and so he was going through a lot, and he ended up taking his own life. This movie kind of chronicles like the journey that Lipsky, who was an aspiring author at the time, had in meeting David Foster Wallace. That kind of highlights the juxtaposition between the two desires of these men. Because Lipsky is kind of thinking like, oh, I wish that I had everything that David Foster Wallace has, like all this fame, all this notoriety, and this book that people can't stop talking about. It's all that Lipsky wanted. And David Foster Wallace just kind of wants to, like, he's just trying to find meaning in life because he's suffering from a lot of depression and loneliness. So a lot of the movie is kind of centered around that journey and the friendship that they develop from realizing how similar they ultimately are and how they both kind of want the same things out of life, and they may not even realize that they already have them.
Wow, that's some pretty heavy stuff right there.
Yeah, definitely not as lighthearted as Charlie's Angels.
No, definitely not as lighthearted as Charlie's Angels. Wow, and did you already see The End of the Tour on Netflix? Yeah,
I watched it a while ago, back when it was on Amazon Prime. I loved it, quite frankly. I think that a lot of movies that have a more somber or existential or esoteric tone, they tend to be a little pretentious. This one captures that tone without being pretentious at all. In fact, if I remember correctly, there is a scene in the film where they kind of make fun of the idea of being pretentious about your philosophy or your philosophic views on life. So I think that it's really interesting that the film kind of handles the idea that it could potentially be a little bit too I guess pedantic would be the right word, in a really tongue-in-cheek way by kind of making fun of itself. And I think that that's really aided by Jason Segel, or Segel. I don't know how to say his name still. I don't know.
We don't know.
The tall dude from How I Met Your Mother. He plays Marshall in How I Met Your Mother. It's honestly, this is one of his best roles. He plays David Foster Wallace pretty flawlessly. As a big fan of David Foster Wallace, I've seen a lot of his videos, and he has a ton of really weird mannerisms and idiosyncrasies. And Seagal just kind of like, he picks them up really well. You feel, honestly, in a weird way, you kind of feel like you're watching David Foster Wallace in the film. And there's just so much space and emptiness in a lot of the shots and the cinematography that really add to that mood and kind of like give a little bit of hope to the film, which I think is super important, because when you're dealing with something heavy like this author who's going through depression and has everything that you could think you could possibly want as an author and ultimately doesn't want it, like when you're going through that as a theme, it's really easy to get dark and sad. So I really appreciated what the director brought to that film. I didn't write down who the director was, but they did an amazing job. So,
and I feel like that's one of the hardest things to accomplish when you're acting and, portraying someone else's life and based on true events, is really capturing through the screen how that person was in real life. So the fact that Jason Segel, how you said, was able to really hone in on those weird like mannerisms that David Foster Wallace had in real life. I mean, that's an amazing skill set, which reminds me of another show, Netflix show right now that I'm going to be looking up really quick that I know I should have prepared right now. But just speaking on how you said that Jason Segel portrayed David Foster Wallace impeccably on the flick of the week. So that's why I'm going to go check really quick what the name is. But it has to do, I think it's called Us. I don't want to be mistaken. Have you seen it, Keith?
I have not, but I think I know what you're talking about.
It has to do with I think it was 4 or 5 men who were wrongly convicted of a woman's rape. And this is based on a true story. I believe it happened. Do you know what movie I'm talking about?
I don't know. I actually
let us know in the comments if you know what movie I'm talking about. It's on Netflix. They won a whole bunch of shows. But anyways, I went off topic a little bit. But that just reminded me what you were mentioning about Jason Segel, just overall how some actors are really great at really, tying in on people's mannerisms of the ones who have passed away.
Yeah, and just to bookend this episode, we talked about The Room at the beginning. The Disaster Artist with James Franco, very similar style movie where he's portraying someone who is actually still alive, but he's portraying that person, the director of The Room, throughout the movie, and he accomplishes the same feat that Seagal does in this movie. Though The Disaster Artist is much more of a comedy, and The End of Tour is much more of a somber film.
Oh, yeah, there we go. I definitely am interested. I definitely want to see this film, and I have a Netflix account, so I'm definitely going to watch The End of the Tour. And ladies and gentlemen, that's going to wrap up today's music episode. We covered Midway, Charlie's Angels, trash genres, Rotten Tomatoes, and the Netflix flick of the week, which is The End of the Tour. And leave us some nice comments. Give us 5 stars. We love 5 stars.
Like and subscribe.
All of that good stuff. And you'll catch Keith and I on the next week's episode at GSMC Music Podcast.
Thanks, everybody.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Movie Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.